All the Young Dudes, Sirius's Perspective by Rollercosterwords. Chapter 110. 6th Year, 17. Thursday the 10th of March, 1977. Happy birthday, Remu! Sirius led the charge, leaping onto Mooney's bed with the other marauders at his side, the moment the sun began to peek over the horizon. They hardly fit, one gangly tangle of scrambling limbs, all knees and elbows. Go off, you wankers, Remus shoved at them. What time is it? Time is immaterial, James crowed, nudging his pointed party hat further up his head. It's your birthday. Your 17th birthday, Sirius grinned, wiggling his eyebrows. He had donned a party hat, too, polka-dotted, which clashed horribly with his striped school tie. You're of age, Peter laughed, diving towards the flustered birthday boy with yet another party hat, which he'd snapped securely around his head. Remus frowned at them, exasperated. You're going to make me wear this all day, aren't you? All three boys nodded, perfectly in sync, sending the colourful streamers attached to their hats fluttering in the early morning sunlight. It's impervious to water, Sirius told him. You can even wear it when you shower. In a moment of giddy recklessness, he shot him a wink, and was rewarded by the very satisfying blush that crept over Remus's cheeks. Neither James nor Peter seemed to notice, too busy clambering to their feet. The boys carefully removed Mrs. Potter's chocolate cake from its hiding place, delivered by Owl just an hour before, and kept warm with one of Sirius's patented heating charms, while Remus showered. By the time he emerged, hair dripping onto his shoulders, they had a large slice already cut for him, along with a stack of birthday cards that they had been collecting throughout the week. Remus smiled bashfully as he opened them, and told James to thank his mother effusively for the cake. And you'll get your proper present later, James told him, grinning. At the party. You lot are mad, Remus shook his head, following them down to the common room. You shouldn't go to all this trouble. Shut up, Mooney, Peter responded cheerfully. Happy birthday, Remus, chorused Lily, Mary and Marlene once the group had arrived in the dining hall. Sirius was quite pleased to see that Lily had talked the other girls into wearing their party hats. The accessories had been his idea. Nice one, Evans. James nudged her as he sat, smirking. Knew you wouldn't let the slide down. Oh, bugger off, Potter. She rolled her eyes and elbowed him back, stifling a smile. Of course, they had to perform their traditional rendition of Happy Birthday, leading the great hall in 3 rounds of the chorus, before they dissolved into cheers and clapping. Remus looked very flushed, stood and bowed bashfully. Next to him, Sirius wolf whistled, and James cackled with laughter. When the Morning Post arrived, 2 different owls swooped down in front of Remus, each with a letter. Sirius peered over his shoulder, curiously. One was from Ferox, the other one was from Dumbledore. Remus snatched the sealed envelope and opened it quickly, under the table. Sirius scooted a bit closer, chin almost resting atop the other boy's shoulder as he read. Mr. Lupin, many happy returns for the day. I understand we have a few things to discuss. Please present yourself at the headmaster's office at 4 p.m. this afternoon. Sincerely, Albus Dumbledore. Here we go, Remus muttered under his breath. Sirius leaned in, asking quietly, Do you want someone to go with you? Remus shook his head, tucking the letter away, and smiled tightly. Nah, thanks for offering, but it's better if I go alone. Sirius frowned, but didn't push him. Despite the effusive birthday cheer of his friends, Remus was subdued for the rest of the day, staring down out of the window absent-mindedly in classes, and only smiling distractedly when classmates wished him a happy birthday. Sirius watched anxiously as he hurried off promptly at 3:45, shoulders locked with tension, party hat bobbing incurrently on his head. Sirius! Emmeline sing-songed, popping up in front of him. Sirius startled, looking away from the corner that Remus had just disappeared around. He hadn't heard her approach. Hey, Em. She wrinkled her nose, looking up at him. Why are you still wearing that silly hat? He blinked. It's Minnie's birthday. Well, I know that, she giggled, linking her arm through his. Come on, can you help me pick out an outfit for the party tonight? Sirius untangled himself carefully. I can't right now, Em. Sorry. Busy. Emmeline frowned, pouting. But you said you'd... I know, I'm sorry. It's just... He trailed off, glancing one more down the corridor where Remus had just disappeared. How about I walk you back to the Ravenclaw common room after the party tonight, okay? Emmeline huffed, crossing her arms stubbornly. Oh, come on, don't be like that. Sirius smiled, the mischievous, wolfish grin that he had found worked in great effect with just about every girl he tried it on, except Evans, who threw a shoe at him the one time he gave it a go, grumbling, I get enough of that from Potter. We can stop by the astronomy tower on the way, if you'd like. Sure enough, Emmeline blushed. Well, I suppose that would be all right. They parted ways soon after, Emmeline hurrying off towards the Ravenclaw tower, and Sirius waiting until she had disappeared down the hall to turn and make his way to Dumbledore's office. He milled about next to the large stone gargoyle, trying to find a charm that would change his eye colour to pass the time. He was envisioning a bright pink, or perhaps a sunny yellow. He was just about to try a fourth spell when the gargoyle suddenly moved, sliding out of the way to reveal what appeared to be one very furious Remus Lupin, who nearly ran straight into Sirius. For some reason he was clutching a shoebox under his arm. Whoa! Sirius staggered back, pressing his hands to the other boy's chest to keep him from colliding. What's up, Moony? What are you doing here? He spat, glaring viciously. I'm just waiting for you. I know you didn't want company, I just thought. You never bloody listen, Remus snarled, shoving past him and barging off down the hall. Sirius had to move quickly to grab his arm, jogging slightly to keep up. I know, I'm terrible. He kept his voice cheerful, studying the stormy expression on his friend's face. Never do as I'm told, do I? Keep shouting at me. I deserve it. Hey, wanna hit me? Remus stopped short, glaring down at him suspiciously. Sirius smiled back, heart pounding. No, I don't want to hit you. Oh, good. Want to punch a wall? No. Remus began walking again, although this time he was at least at a pace that Sirius could match. Want to get stoned? No. Drunk? Maybe. Perfect. Sirius grinned, guiding them towards the dining hall. Because I think that's what half the school has in mind after dinner. What's in the box? Remus swallowed, looking down. After a moment he said, It's just some stuff I think my dad left me. I'm not opening it till later. Ah, that explained the mood, then. Sirius shrugged bitterly. Fair enough. Remus remained sullen when they sat down for dinner, shoveling food into his mouth to avoid talking. All it took was a pointed look from Sirius for James to catch up onto the situation, and he quickly engaged their group in a farcical story about something that had happened on his latest prefect patrol, until he could hardly be heard over the raucous laughter of their friends. Even Remus began to perk up, smiling and chuckling as James imitated a particularly cranky portrait that had started shouting at him for disturbing his sleep. Sirius was still trying to catch his breath from laughing so hard when Emmeline suddenly materialized, sliding into his lap and planting a long, wet kiss on his mouth. Sirius blinked in surprise, then quickly kissed her back, uncomfortably aware of Remus's eyes on them, watching. Happy birthday, Remus, Emmeline said, tossing her hair and smiling when she pulled away. He only nodded in response, frowning as he set down his spoon. I am so excited about the party, she added, giving Sirius's shoulder a little squeeze. Should be good, James grinned. Moony's birthdays always are. Why does everyone call you Moony, anyway? Emmeline asked, turning back to Remus. He shot her an irritated look. Not everyone, just my friends. She blinked, obvious at all loss on how to respond, and Sirius frowned. Had something happened between the two of them? He didn't think he had ever actually heard Emmeline speak to Remus before, but then she didn't spend much time with the Marauders. When Sirius hung out with her, they were usually alone. He squeezed her waist gently. Hey, why don't I meet you later? We've just got some stuff to get ready. Okay, she smiled brightly. Remember your promise. She leaned in, kissing him again, curling her fingers in his hair. Sirius smiled at her as she jumped off his lap, giving her a quick wave before turning back to his friends. He didn't pay much mind to what she had said until 15 minutes later, when he and Remus were alone in their bedroom. James and Peter were busy decorating the common room, but Sirius had begged off, insisting that he needed to get ready. "My dashing good looks are the most important decoration for this party, and you know it, Potter." "Promise?" Remus asked, once the door had shut behind them. "What did you promise her?" "Oh, just that I'd walk her back to the common room after the party." Remus gave him a look. "Via the astronomy tower?" Sirius smirked playfully as he began to unbutton his shirt. "Maybe. Why?" "Nothing." Remus flopped down on his bed, a sour expression on his face. Sirius frowned, turning to dig through the chest of drawers. Was Remus upset that he wasn't going to spend the entire night with him? But it wasn't as if they'd spend the whole party together anyway, not when Remus had so many other people to hang out with. "What about you and Mary?" Sirius kept his voice casual. "That thing finished now, or what?" "Yeah," Remus said slowly. "Just an experiment, sort of. Do you know what I mean?" Sirius focused on buttoning back up the shirt he pulled on. His mouth had gone dry. "What? Wasn't good?" "It was alright. Not as good as—" A pause, then, quickly, "Not as good as when it's you and me." Sirius froze, eyes snapping to meet Remus's. The words echoed dizzily in his head. "Not as good as when it's just you and me." The blood flow of warmth that poured through him was overwhelming, terrifying, something he could drown in. He likes me better. But that wasn't. It couldn't be. "Is it like that for you?" Remus was staring at him, eyes turning to burning embers in his head. Sirius looked away, trying to remember how to breathe, rifling through his drawers once again. The word worked its way up slowly in his throat. An admission, a confession, bile creeping up the back of his tongue. "Yeah." "Pardon?" Sirius took a breath, swallowing as he shut the drawer. "I said yeah. It's better with you." It was like gutting himself, like reaching down in his throat and clawing into his chest until he caught hold of his heart, tugging it outside his body and throwing it, bloody and raw, onto the hardwood floor between them. "Right," Remus said quietly, and Sirius wanted to disappear. It was all too much, too sudden, all at once. It took all his effort to keep his voice steady as he turned, brushing his hair behind his ear, and saying quickly, "I suppose it's because we know each other so well, eh? Right, I'd better go down and help Prongs before he comes after me with the jelly legs drinks. We'll send Peter to get you when it's ready." He didn't wait for Remus to respond, rushing out of the door before he could fall apart completely. The nice thing about drinking, Sirius thought as he poured one more fire whiskey into his cup with a shaky hand, was that when you were drunk, you didn't have to think about anything. Just now, for example, Mooney was standing across the room, laughing at one of Marlene's impressions, and Sirius didn't have to think about why the sight of it made his heart kick, or his stomach flip, or his blood stir with heat. He could just feel it, just smile and sink into the blissful haze of fire whiskey, remembering Remus's earlier words. "Not as good as when it's just you and me. Just you and me. You and me." "Hiya, gorgeous," chirped a voice into his ear. Sirius turned and came face to face with Mary, whose eyes were outlined strikingly with black. "Hi yourself, beautiful." He grinned easily, and she laughed, raising her eyebrows in a pointed look. He blinked. "Oh!" Sirius spun and glanced over his shoulder. Remus was still talking to Marlene. He turned back to Mary, leaning in considerably. "Did you bring it?" She wiggled her eyebrows, pulling her arm out from behind her back to reveal a familiar album. "Ta-da!" "Yes!" Sirius cheered, nudging her towards the record player. "Go on, put it on, while Marlene's distracting him." Mary nudged him back. "Why can't you put it on? You're closer." "I can't. I'm Mooney's favourite." He dragged out the word, slurring slightly. "What do you think if he caught me?" Mary laughed, rolling her eyes. "You are an utter wimp." But she obliged, trotting over to the record player and giggling as she replaced the current track. She She twirled back to him, still giggling, and Sirius smiled delightedly as he grabbed her hand, spinning her around. "Mary," Sirius said, leaning down to speak directly into her ear, "I think you were right." "What?" She had to shout to be heard over the music. Half the students in the room were dancing now, and many were singing along. "I think you were right," he repeated. "About feelings." "What about feelings?" "I think I've fucked up," he stumbled, dizzy, and she giggled, clutching his arm to steady him. "Like, they just get too big. It's crazy. I have no idea what you're talking about." Sirius shook his head. "Stop thinking, you silly sod." He lifted his arms to twirl her. "I know. I just needed to tell someone." Mary gave him a funny look, but didn't question him any further. They danced for a bit longer, then stumbled over to the punch. After a few rather nasty looks from Emmeline, Mary bid him adieu, slightly unsteady as she pushed her way through the crowd of students to go find Rome and Rawhide. Sirius spent a few minutes dancing with Emmeline, to even things out a bit. Once her ego was sufficiently soothed, he took a break to lean by the turntable, chattering with James and Marlene about their upcoming Quidditch match. He felt very aware of Remus, slouched in an armchair, watching him. His eyes were dangerous, heavy-lidded and magnetic, bottle dangling from those long fingers. Every time Sirius felt the urge to look at him, he took another drink, stifling it. He wasn't entirely sure what would happen if their eyes met, but he felt pretty certain that it would end up with him combusting in the middle of the common room. "You and me," said Mooney's voice in the back of his head. "You and me." By the time he noticed Remus leaving, shoving off the armchair and stumbling over to the stairway, Sirius was almost too drunk to follow him. He tripped, pushing himself away from the turntable. He had to wave James away. "Checking on Mooney," he mumbled, slurring. Luckily, James was distracted by Lily, who had just spilled her cup of witch's brew all over his shirt. It was calmer in the dorm room, far away from the crush of bodies and the pulsing music. Cooler, too. Sirius sighed, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. From inside the bathroom there was the unmistakable sound of retching. His stomach twisted, and he wondered, suddenly, if this had been a good idea. He heard the toilet flushing, water running, soft shuffling. Sirius was seized by panic, realizing that he was about to be alone, again, with Mooney. But before he could decide whether to run away, the door swung open. He leaned against the bedpost for support, shoving his hands into his pockets. Their eyes met. His heart crawled into his throat. "Came up to check you're all right." Remus stepped towards him, carefully, shutting the bathroom door. "Yeah," he said, shoulders tense. "Just a bit too pissed, that's all. Going to bed." "Look, about the stuff I said," Sirius blurted, words spilling off his tongue. "I'm really sorry. I don't even know why I am, but I'm just sorry, okay? Maybe if he hadn't had so much to drink, maybe if his head was less fuzzy, he'd be able to figure it out. What to do with the knot of guilt that had tied itself so firmly in his stomach. But then again, the horrible, snarled feeling that he'd done something wrong was half the reason why he'd drunk so much in the first place. He reached out, gripping Mooney's shoulder. He was so warm and so there, and Sirius wanted him, and maybe he wanted Sirius too. So Sirius kissed him. He kissed him hungrily, desperately. He kissed him like it was a new language, like it would be enough to communicate, like if he did it just right, Remus would taste the words on his tongue. He kissed the heart into his mouth, thinking, you and me, you and me, you and me. And Remus kissed back. Sirius stumbled slightly as he pushed forwards, hands twisting into the fabric of Mooney's shirt, wanting more, always wanting more, and Remus pulled away. "You're drunk," he said, staring down, all pupil. "Yeah?" Sirius smiled dopily. "So are you." "Yeah." Remus untwisted himself, stepping away, and Sirius had to lean against the bedpost again. "Come back," he thought. "Don't leave." "I don't think we should. I think you'll regret it." The words barely registered. Sirius couldn't think about anything except Mooney's mouth, his hands, how it would feel to touch him. "Since when do you care?" he murmured, starting forwards. But Remus pulled back, again, placing a hand on his chest, pushing him away. "No, Sirius. What about Emmeline?" "Emmeline? What did any of this have to do with Emmeline? She was nothing, nobody. Fuck Emmeline!" Remus's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile, if it wasn't so bitter. "But you already do, don't you, Black? That's the problem." "What? So?" Sirius struggled to process the words, trying to understand. What was Remus on about? That was different. Everything was different. Nothing compared to them, just the two of them together. We have to stop our thing just because of her. "Our thing? God, Sirius, you're unbelievable." "What?" "Sirius!" As if on cue, Emmeline's sing-song voice echoed from the stairwell. "Where are you?" They turned simultaneously to look back towards the open door. "You'd better go to her," Remus grunted, moving away towards his bed. Sirius followed him, reaching out, tugging for the waistband of his pyjama bottoms. He didn't want Emmeline. He didn't care about Emmeline. Why couldn't Remus see that? "Come on, just—" "No." "Sirius, I'm coming to get you." Remus shoved him away, glaring. "Go on. I don't want her up here." Sirius stared at him, dizzy, heat spilling sticky through his gut. It was like trying to cage a wild dog, wrangling the sharp-toothed want that had its teeth around his neck. "Okay, but I'll come back. We can talk." "No," Remus snapped, retreating behind the bed curtains. "We've talked. It's over. Good night, Sirius." Chapter 111. 6th Year, Separation. Sirius waked the next morning with a splitting headache and a sour taste on the back of his tongue. He scrubbed a hand across his face as he sat up, blinking the morning sunlight out of his eyes. It's over. Ah, there it was, that cold pit in the base of his stomach, stretching like a cat, sending ice water through his veins. He remembered, vaguely, returning to the party with Emmeline, where he had grabbed a bottle of fire whiskey out of James's hands and poured it down his throat, like he was trying to drown himself. After that, everything went a bit blurry. He was pretty sure that he'd kept his promise to walk Emmeline back to the common room, recalled flashes of something that might have been starlight, and the touch of her small, soft hands. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting nausea. Remus's words echoed in his head. "It's over. It's over. It's over." Sirius groaned. What had he done wrong? He tried to recall their conversation. He'd apologized, and then he'd kissed him, and then Remus had said something about Emmeline and regret. But he said it was better, Sirius thought miserably. He said it was better when it was just me. He wouldn't say that and not mean it. He wouldn't. He wouldn't. Sirius thought again of the way he'd kissed Remus, greedy and fervent, doing nothing to hide the horrible want that rose like a tidal wave any time they were alone together. He thought of Remus's hand on his chest, pushing him away. "Stupid," whispered a small, vicious voice in the back of his head. "Did you really think he wanted you? Did you really think you could poison him, corrupt him, twist him until he felt the same way?" He swallowed, remembering the way he'd thrown himself at Remus, thinking of secret, guilty desire that had chanted silently when they were together, like wordless magic. "Like me better, like me better, like me better." "This is all your fault," Sirius told himself miserably. "You stupid, bloody idiot." Because of course Remus would pull away, once he knew the full scope of his hidden, insidious need. It had always been wrong, what they were doing, from the very start. Sirius had known that, and he had still, selfishly, clung to Remus, like a weed choking a vine. He couldn't blame his friend for wanting to leave before it got too late. "But he said it was good," said a tiny, hopeful piece of his heart. "He said that he wanted you too." Sirius squashed it. What he had said didn't matter. Clearly, Remus didn't want him anymore. He knew that it was coming, he reminded himself as he brushed his teeth. He knew that things would end eventually. But he still wanted nothing more than to crawl back into bed and squeeze his eyes shut, pulling the covers over his head. Both Remus and James were absent from their room that morning, so it was only Peter who accompanied him down to the great hall for breakfast. The smaller boy was not in a particularly chatty mood. He was yawning so much that he almost tripped on one of the rickety steps and tumbled headlong down the stairs. The other marauders weren't at the breakfast table either, which wasn't particularly surprising. Sirius assumed that James was probably out on the Quidditch pitch, and Remus most likely scurried off to the library to avoid him after their conversation last night. Sirius mumbled a half-hearted greeting to Mary and the girls, who responded with bleary-eyed groans. He had just begun to force some fried eggs into his fragile stomach when the missing boys appeared, pink-cheeked and panting, sweat beading at their temples. "Christ," Mary gaped at them. "You've not been exercising? Bloody lunatics." "You went, Moony?" Sirius asked, gobsmacked, for a moment. He forgot about the strange tension from the previous night. But then Remus's eyes shuttered, and he shrugged, and Sirius remembered that things weren't normal between them, that they might never be again. He went back to his eggs, swallowing around the lump in his throat. They had all been sitting at the table, picking at their breakfasts, except Remus, who ate, as usual, like he was starving, for roughly 15 minutes when Evans suddenly sat bolt upright, mouth popping open, as if someone had just hit her with a stinging jinx. "Oh, shit!" she exclaimed, kicking James under the table. "Potter! We never gave Remus his present." James shot her an amused smile, and Remus looked back and forth between the two sceptically. "You and James got me a present. Together." "We all did," James corrected, as Lily's face went very pink. "And there's no need to beat me up, Evans. I've got it right here." He reached into the pocket of his robes, withdrawing a smooth, brown leather box, with a lovely gold border embossed on the top. "You all." Remus trailed off, frowning as James placed the box in his hands. "I hope you didn't spend too much. You know I can't—" "Oh, shut your face, Moony," Peter grumbled, yawning over his porridge. "We had a whip round for you. Almost everyone in the Gryffindor Tower wanted to put in." "Not just Gryffindor either." Marlene perked up from where she'd been wilting over a mug of black coffee. "Nearly everyone we asked. Even some teachers." Remus stared down at the box, with a dazed expression now, as if he couldn't quite believe what they were saying. It made Sirius want to reach out, to squeeze his knee under the table, or place a hand on his arm. But he couldn't do that. Not anymore. "Open it, Remus," Lily urged, smiling. Remus obliged, prying the box open and staring down at the gift that lay within. There had been some debate over what to get him. James had had his eye on this set of Oakhamy feather quills, and Peter had suggested a year's supply of chocolate frogs from Honeydukes. But when Sirius had seen the golden pocket watch nestled on midnight blue velvet in a glass display case, he had known immediately that they simply had to buy it. Fortunately, Lily had agreed with him, and if Lily agreed, then James agreed, and if James agreed, then Peter agreed. And that was that. Remus lifted his watch carefully out of his case, cradling it as if it were the most precious piece of treasure in the universe. He ran a finger over the engraved initials, R.J.L. Sirius watched him, heart twisting painfully in his chest. When Remus snapped open the pocket watch to look inside, he frowned, studying the little compass nestled opposite the whirling clock. "I didn't think they worked in Hogwarts." He squinted, studying down at the unusual contraption. "It's special," Mary beamed, rocking forward in her seat. "It doesn't point north, or wherever normal ones do. If you say the name of somebody you love, it points in their direction." "Try it out, Moony," James said eagerly. Remus glanced up at them, shyly, before raising the device to his lips and murmuring, "Lily Evans." The needle began to spin immediately, whizzing around to point straight across the table. Lily blushed, looking very pleased, and James kicked Remus under the table. Bloody ladies, man. You're all amazing, Remus said reverently. Bloody amazing. Yesterday, the words might have made Sirius glow with joy, but today, he just felt sick. For the rest of March, Sirius Black was busy. Extremely busy, incredibly busy, astoundingly busy. He was busy pranking Slytherins, busy cheering on James at Quidditch matches, busy snogging Emmeline and aggravating McGonagall and sneaking out to the kitchens with Peter. He was so busy, in fact, that he hardly said 2 words to Remus. He didn't have time to, and that was fine. It was perfectly fine for Sirius, and clearly it was fine for Remus too. Moony was suddenly everyone's best friend, assisting every needy 5th year that came crying for help with their owls, going on patrols with Lily when there was a gap in the prefect rotations, calling endless extra sessions for his silly SWAT study group. Not that Sirius noticed. He was far too busy to notice. He had his own stuff going on. Lots of stuff, very important stuff, stuff that left no time for thinking about the little furrow between Moony's brows as he read over Peter's essay, or the easy laugh Marlene pulled out of him with her impression of James's Quidditch captain voice, or the soft smile he gave to Lily when she linked their arms together, setting off down the corridor for one of her patrols. It was purely coincidental that Sirius ended up outside the Charms classroom on Friday afternoon, purely coincidental that Remus happened to be hosting some sort of dueling workshop inside, and definitely, purely, entirely coincidental that Sirius needed a place to hide. Sure, he had the invisibility cloak, but better safe than sorry. None of the younger students seemed to think anything of it when the door opened, seemingly on its own. Piers was always flying around the castle, slamming doors open and shut. It wasn't exactly unusual. Sirius crept around the edges of the room, making sure to avoid bumping into anyone. It was quite crowded, he noted with slight surprise. He snuck through the open door of Flitwick's office, where he would wait in peace and quiet until dinner time. Maybe he and Moony could even go down to the dining hall, together. They wouldn't have to talk, just walk, just be together for a bit. That wasn't too much to ask. But of course, there was no fooling Remus Lupin. From outside the office, Sirius heard him clear his throat. That's good. Keep practicing. Remember to enunciate nice and loudly. For me. I'll be right back. The next moment, Remus appeared in the doorway, glaring furiously at the space just 2 feet over from where Sirius was standing, as he hissed, Sirius, get out. This isn't... I'm hiding from Filch. Have a heart, Moony. He shoved the invisibility cloak off for a moment, grinning, and felt a small, familiar thrill when Remus's eyes locked on his, even though those eyes were currently flashing dangerously, irritation written plainly across the other boy's face. You've got the cloak. Hide somewhere else. I'm nearly finished here anyway. I'll be leaving in a minute. Well, that's no big deal, is it? I'll just stay here till they're gone. Might even learn something. Remus, are you okay in there? Ugh, it was that blonde prat. Yeah, sorry. Remus shot him one final murderous glare before turning and stepping smoothly back into the classroom. Sirius continued to grin, heart pounding as he pulled the cloak back on. Now that Moony knew he was there, Sirius figured that there was no point in hiding. He stepped out of the office, leaning up against the wall to watch the class. He'd never actually been in one of Moony's little study groups before, and it was deliciously indulgent watching him murmur explanations to younger students and briskly call for the attention of the group. Remus was in his element. It reminded Sirius a bit of when he would take charge of pranks, commanding the room with a firm and careful hand. Blimey, Sirius thought, watching him. He'd make a cracking professor. After a few minutes, Remus called the class to an end, ushering out all of the students with some excuse about the room being used for another club. Sirius yawned quietly, waiting for everyone to leave, and everyone did. Everyone, except for that wretched little blonde bugger who stood in the centre of the room, smiling. I'll help you clear up, he chirped, looking far too keen. Sirius rolled his eyes, but Remus didn't seem to mind. The 2 of them worked together, rearranging desks and making sure everything was back in its place. Sirius watched impatiently. The blonde kid kept stealing glances at Remus. What was his name, again? Did you read that book? Something with a C? Charlie? Chester? The Charioteer? Remus, who had his back turned to the other boy, grimaced, but then nodded, turning as he said, Yeah, it was good. Chadwick? Christian? Christopher! That was it, Chris. Oh, I'm glad you liked it, Christopher gushed effusively. Sirius rolled his eyes. Who cared that much about a sodding book? What about the ending? Oh, yeah, it was good. I liked it. Really? The smaller boy frowned skeptically. I didn't. I wish Laurie had picked Andrew. Don't you? Ugh, what was he on about? They weren't even tidying up anymore, just standing in the middle of the room chatting. Get a move on, Chris, Sirius thought impatiently. Well, I like Ralph, Remus said, shrugging. Even if he wasn't perfect, he was more, I don't know, exciting. Now Sirius was paying attention. What was this? Remus was talking about some character named Ralph being exciting. Ralph was definitely a boy's name, right? What exactly did he mean by exciting? Exciting how? Why was he talking about it with bloody Christopher? I thought you'd like him the best, the other boy sighed, slinging his satchel over his shoulder. He was still hovering, standing very close to Remus. He reminded me a bit of your friend, Sirius Black. Oh? Remus asked, brows shooting up. Sirius straightened, finding that he was suddenly incredibly interested in the conversation. Yeah, Christopher said with a sheepish sort of smile. Sorry, but it's a bit obvious that you have a bit of a thing for him. A thing? A thing? What in the name of Merlin's saggy bollocks was that supposed to mean? Christopher shook his head, releasing a small, sad laugh. It's a waste of time, Remus. Can't you see that? Yeah, he's beautiful and everything, but he's clearly girl mad. You ought to... you deserve someone who cares about you as much as you care about them. What the fuck was that supposed to mean? Who was Christopher? Why was he acting like he knew everything there was to know? Sirius had never even spoken to him. Christopher, I don't... But then, before Remus could even finish his sentence, Christopher was kissing him, stretching up on his tiptoes and pressing his mouth to Mooney's lips. Sirius clenched his hands into fists. It took every ounce of his self-control not to throw the invisibility cloak off and storm across the classroom so that he could beat the living daylights out of Christopher. But it was over almost as quickly as it had begun. Remus stared down at the shorter boy tenderly, breathing. Oh, Chris. Shut up, thought Sirius furiously. Don't do that. Don't you dare say his name. You're such a good mate, and For a moment, Christopher deflated, and Remus stared down at him helplessly, and Sirius glared, wishing that looks could kill. But then the younger boy straightened, stepping back and giving a quick shake of his head. It's fine. Honestly, I'd rather be friends than not, if that's all we can be. What the fuck is going on? Sirius thought. His blood was on fire with rage, magic hissing under his skin. Come on, Christopher said, smiling. It's steak and kidney pie tonight. Your favourite. Remus said nothing, only followed him out of the classroom. He didn't even glance back as he pulled the door shut behind him. Chapter 112. 6th Year. Confrontation. Bastard, Sirius thought as he stormed through the corridors. Bloody fucking bastard. He shoved into the boys' loos, which were thankfully empty, and ripped off the invisibility cloak, stuffing it under his robes. What the fuck was Remus playing at? Fucking snogging other blokes when he knew Sirius was watching. What kind of bloody mind game was he playing? Sirius clenched his fists, wishing he could just punch something, or, more specifically, someone. It was dinner time, but Sirius didn't go to the Great Hall. He wasn't hungry in the slightest. His stomach was twisted all into knots, and besides, he doubted that he could sit across from the table and look at Remus without biting his head off. If he had to watch Mooney sip pumpkin juice and act like everything was fine, he would probably scream. So he went back to the dorm. He still had an emergency stash of fags that he'd nicked from Emmeline somewhere in the bottom of his trunk, and after a few moments of digging, Sirius managed to unearth them. He went down to the common room to smoke, where he could flick the cigarette butts into the fire. Christopher. Really? Fucking Christopher. What did Remus see in him? He was such a gormless little tosser, always turning up his nose whenever anyone tried to have a bit of fun in his presence. He was so bloody boring. Even his name was forgettable. Sirius lit another cigarette, bouncing his leg as he inhaled. And that conversation! What the bloody hell had that been? It certainly sounded as though the two of them had some sort of history, even though it had ended with Remus rejecting Chris, reminding him that they just were mates. Sirius snorted. Right, he had been mates with Remus too, and look how that had turned out. We'll always be friends, Padfoot. He was on his third cigarette when the portrait door swung open, and a crowd of students began to push in. Sirius stiffened, sucking hard on his fag and staring straight ahead into the fire. "All right, Black," came Mary's cheerful voice from over his shoulder. "Yeah, fine." He didn't turn around, still watching the embers glow in the grate. She came to stand beside him. "Weren't hungry?" "Nope." He exhaled a cloud of smoke, tasting ash on the back of his tongue. "Ah," Mary gave him a wry look, half turning to exchange a glance with their friends. "In one of your moods, I see." "Fuck off," Sirius wanted to spit, but he didn't. It wasn't Mary he was angry at. She didn't deserve his wrath. But he couldn't very well stand up and throttle Remus in the middle of the common room, at least not without people asking a few questions. Still, he entertained the thought, particularly when Christopher returned, and Remus hurried over to him immediately, asking how some prefects meeting had gone. Oh, Sirius thought, watching from the corner of his eye as the two boys cozied up on the window seat in the back of the room. Must have been the opera. He'd been so wrapped up in his anger that he'd nearly forgotten the reason he'd been hiding in the charms classroom in the first place. He and James had enchanted all the suits of armour on the 5th floor to sing a few select numbers from El Ofro, a proper classic. Sure enough, James and Lily returned from the same prefects meeting moments later, Lily with an exasperated smile and James with a shit-eating grin. They plopped down in front of the fireplace, where Marlene and Mary were playing a tag-team game of chess against Peter, and Sirius was still chain-smoking. "Foiled once again by Hogwarts' mysterious pranksters," said James, shaking his head in an exaggerated mimicry of defeat. Lily rolled her eyes. "I take it you couldn't catch the culprit, then?" Marlene smiled wryly from where she was straddled on the floor. Mary sat between her legs, leaning back against Marlene's chest like she was a makeshift armchair. "Right you are, McKinnon," James heaved a mournful sigh. "Whoever he, or she, may be, they continue to elude us." He glanced over at Sirius, trying to catch his eye, but Sirius wasn't in the mood. He'd just about finished his third cigarette and was wondering if he should go for number 4. "Goodness, Lily," Mary said, smirking up from the floor. "You really have no idea who could be responsible for such vile schemes. I mean, opera in the hallways. Only a true twisted mind could cook up that." Lily flushed, frowning. "There wasn't any proof," she said defensively, and James echoed her. "Yeah, MacDonald? There wasn't any proof." Mary snorted, shaking her head. "Whatever you say." They continued to poke fun, but Sirius was only half listening. Christopher had just stomped off in a huff, on his way to the dorms. A few minutes later, Remus followed. And Sirius stood, abruptly, interrupting James's impression of Flitwick trying to silence the singing suits of armour. His friends turned to goggle at him, startled by the sudden motion. Bathroom," he muttered, before hurrying over to the staircase and making his way up to the dorms himself. Of course, when he arrived at their room, the bathroom was already occupied. Sirius could hear the sound of running water in the sink. Mooney must have been getting ready for bed. He shoved his pack of cigarettes, still clutched in his fist, into his pocket, then folded his arms to wait. It didn't take very long. After only a minute or two, the bathroom door swung open, and Remus stepped out in his pyjamas. He hesitated, blanching when he saw Sirius, but then squared his shoulders and stepped forwards, deliberately. "Hello, Sirius," he said stiffly, nodding. "I'm just going to bed." He moved as if to walk past the other boy, but Sirius stepped out in front of him, fuming. "You've really pissed me off, you know that?" He glared, trying to keep from shouting. "Excuse me?" Remus stared back at him in shock, as if he had no idea what Sirius was on about, which only made the anger in his chest start gnashing its teeth. "If you were trying to make me jealous, then I think it's really bloody low of you, Remus." The taller boy rolled his eyes as if to say, "Here we go again." Sirius could have kicked him. "Oh, of course," Remus scoffed derisively. "Everything's about you, isn't it? For God's sake, you weren't even supposed to be there. Why didn't you just leave with the rest of the group?" I thought you wanted to go down to dinner together. How was I supposed to know you've been having secret trysts with that... I haven't been having secret trysts with anyone but you idiot. Remus glared. And you've already made me regret that. Christopher is my friend. And either way, it's none of your bloody business, so keep your nose out. Fine! Now he was really shouting, unable to stop his voice from climbing in his throat. If that's what you want. I said so, didn't I? Sirius wanted to punch him. He wanted to ball up his fist the way that Remus had taught him, and use it to smash his nose, to hear him crack, to make him bleed. He wanted to curse him, and scream at him, and kick him. More than anything, he wanted so badly to kiss him. But he didn't. He didn't do anything, because Remus shoved past him, stomping over to his bed, and ripping the curtains closed. And there was nothing Sirius could do except turn and leave the way he'd come in. He nearly tripped in his haste to get down the stairs, bursting back into the common room with such force that he startled a group of first-years playing gobstones on the carpet nearby. By the fireplace, James glanced up, frowning. Sirius? He didn't stop, didn't even pause, heading straight for the portrait hole. Sirius! Oi, where you going? It's almost curfew. Fuck curfew, Sirius growled, throwing open the portrait door. From behind him, he could vaguely hear James reassuring the rest of their friends. No, not to worry, I've got this. But he didn't slow down, charging through the corridor, even when he heard the unmistakable sound of James Potter's hurried footsteps, following behind him as he called out, Black! Sirius! Oi! I don't want to talk, Potter. Well, that's just too bloody bad, isn't it? Leave me alone. No. James caught up to him, matching his furious stride without even breaking a sweat. Stupid sodding workout schedule. Right then, where are we off to? I told you to go away. Oh, how you wound me, Black. Fuck off. Only if you ask nicely. Sirius made a frustrated noise in the back of his throat, something between a whine and a growl, distinctly canine. I can't talk right now, Prongs. Then don't talk, James said simply. Sirius slowed, glancing at him. Don't talk, he repeated. Come on, let's go to Honeyduke's. We can nick a couple of chocolate frogs, and I can bore you silly with all the evidence that Lily Evans is definitely falling in love with me. Sirius snorted, and James smiled. All right? All right. By some miracle, they weren't caught as they made their way to the statue of the humpback witch. As promised, James spent the entire walk into Hogsmeade nattering on about several pivotal instances in which Lily had smiled at him, and one crucial moment which he had gotten her to laugh. Sirius listened, rolling his eyes and shaking his head, and by the time they began the return trip, with pockets stuffed full of sweets, his anger had cooled somewhat. James fell silent for a bit, crunching on a sugar quill. Once he finished the sweet, he began to speak again, cautiously. So, he dragged the word out, glancing at Sirius from the corner of his eye. It was dark in the tunnel. The only light was the ghostly blue glow from their wands. Has something happened between you and Remus? Sirius stiffened. After a moment, he muttered, No. James sighed. Oh, come on, mate, he said quietly. Whatever it is, you can tell me. I can't, Sirius thought miserably. I really can't. What was he supposed to say? Well, James, now that you mention it, something actually has happened with me and Mooney. You see, I sort of accidentally got us started tossing each other off, just as mates. Except then I wanted to sort of touch him all the bloody time, and that sort of buggered up the whole thing with girls for him. So I may have let slip that girls had never been good for me, and so he called off the whole thing, which was fine, except now I've caught him kissing another bloke, and it fucking hurts to breathe when I think about it. Lovely. He certainly couldn't say any of that. Nothing happened, Potter. He's just being a prick. Or I was being a prick. I don't know. It's not important. He could feel James studying him in the dark. There was a long stretch of silence, during which the other boy seemed to be waiting for him to say something else, but Sirius remained quiet. Eventually, James sighed. All right, then, he said, voice a bit bruised. If you say so. Friday the 15th of April, 1977. Merlin, Sirius thought to himself, staring at the bright spring sunshine that filtered in through the windows as he scrubbed out the rabbit cages for McGonagall. Is there anything more of a bloody pain than exams? The dreaded revision period was in full swing at Hogwarts, and over the course of the past 3 weeks, Sirius had watched each and every one of his friends fall prey to the monster that was exam prep. Remus had gone first, of course. He was already running himself into the ground with that study club. Exam season was hardly a change. And James followed soon after, cutting back his pranking to spend long hours poring over textbooks in the library. Even Peter could only be goaded away from his notes by games of chess, and playing chess against Peter was almost as dull as studying. Even worse, the library was now full at all hours of the day, which meant that Sirius couldn't be caught dead there. Mary had offered to go back with him, and he had taken her up on it a few times. His second trek amongst the shelves had not gone much better than the first, but on the third he'd managed to stick by Mary's side for the entire walk down to Pince's desk and back. But they had always gone to the large rooms when they were practically empty. Sirius nearly choked with shame as he imagined how a table full of fifth years, cramming for owls, would react if they saw him flinching away from the bookshelves, shaking. Pathetic. As the only one not wasting away over textbooks or camping out in the library all day, it was up to Sirius to maintain the Marauder's most important responsibility, mischief-making. He was quite happy to pick up the others' slack. He needed something to keep busy, and Emmeline could only do so much. But it did, unfortunately, necessitate taking a few more risks. It was hard to post a lookout, for example, when there was only one of you, and it was due to this increased risk factor that came with pranking during exam season that Sirius was stuck, on a Friday afternoon, in detention with McGonagall, cleaning rabbit shit. By the time he had finished, Sirius was aching to stretch out his legs, and fancied a chat with James. He checked the map quickly, and saw that Prongs was sitting outside, along with Wormtail and Moony. Well, he supposed it didn't matter. Remus would have his nose stuck in a book the entire time anyway. Sirius exited the classroom, and was startled to see Emmeline waiting outside in the corridor. "Em?" he frowned, slinging his bag higher on his shoulder. "What are you doing here?" She smiled brightly. "Figured I'd meet you when your detention ended. Here, I brought you some food. You missed lunch." "Thanks," he grunted, shoving the paper-wrapped sandwich that she had offered into his bag. "I'm not hungry, though." "Oh," she blinked. "Well, anyway, what are you up to now?" "Gonna meet the lads on the grounds. Probably be really boring. I think they're just revising." "Oh, I'll come with you." He sighed as she trotted after him, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. He liked Emmeline well enough, but did they have to do bloody everything together? "All right, lads," Sirius called once he caught sight of his friends on the lawn. They were sitting in their usual spot near the beech tree, and Emmeline followed as he strolled across the grass. Peter scooted over to make room for them. "Where have you been?" James grinned up at him. "Never see you these days." "Not my fault you've become one of them, Prefect Potter." Sirius tossed his hair out of his eyes. "I had detention." "You're in detention more often than I'm doing anything prefectish," James shot back, smirking. He nodded to Emmeline as she sat. "All right, Em." "Hi, James," she replied cheerfully. "Peter? Remus? Are you all revising?" "Unfortunately," Peter sighed. "Mooney's not helping me, though." "Oh, help yourself for once," Remus grumbled, frowning down at his notes. "I think it's a good idea," Emmeline smiled. "Get it out of the way before Hogsmeade this weekend. I think it's responsible. Don't you, Sirius?" Ugh, she always did this, talking pointedly about something that was so great to do, something that Sirius very obviously was not doing, instead of just outright voicing her disapproval with his behaviour. "I suppose. Speaking of," she smoothed her skirt primly, "do you fancy going into Hogsmeade? Meet you there, or you could pick me up outside the common room?" I don't know. Why does it always have to be such a big deal?" Emmeline frowned, face growing pinched. "Other boys don't mind making plans to take their girlfriends out," she said snippily. Sirius tried to resist the urge to roll his eyes. His friends had all suddenly become very interested in their work, eyes glued to the pages of their books. Sirius could tell he was making them uncomfortable, but he couldn't bring himself to stifle the irritation that he felt as he looked at Emmeline's pouting face. I'm not other boys, he snapped roughly. I thought you liked that. So did I, she huffed. So what? I'm a terrible boyfriend because I don't want to trail around you like some soppy git. It's not what I'm asking, and you know it. Stop complaining then. I'm not complaining. Sounds like it. Moan, moan, moan. Emmeline opened and closed her mouth like a dying fish, looking as if she very badly wanted to say something, but knowing simultaneously that any response would only prove Sirius's point. He waited, wound up, ready for a fight. But instead of speaking, she only shut her mouth and stared down at the ground, eyes suspiciously shiny. Sirius felt a kick of guilt, which only fueled his irritation. He hadn't even wanted her to come with him in the first place, and now she was getting upset with him for not treating her like the centre of his universe. "Oh, Merlin, don't sulk," he groaned, frowning. "If you're angry, then let's have a fight. If you're okay, then let's have a snog. But please, don't sulk." "And those are the only options with you, aren't they, Sirius?" Emmeline huffed, scrambling to her feet and glaring down furiously. "Yep," he smirked up at her, leaning back on his hands. "Oh!" she scowled, throwing up her hands and spinning around to stomp off into the castle. "Good riddance." Sirius glanced back at his friends. They were all still, loyally, absorbed in their notes, very pointedly looking away. After a moment, James cleared his voice. "Not very nice, Pads." He still didn't look up from his book. "She's upset now." "She's always upset," Sirius complained. "What about my feelings?" "I'm not convinced you have any," James teased, turning to Remus. "What do you think, Moony?" The other boy glanced up from his book, looking as if he had only been half listening. Does Padfoot have feelings?" Their eyes met. Sirius's throat had gone dry. Remus blinked, straightening up and turning back to his book. "Definitely not." "Bastard," Sirius thought furiously. "Bastard, bastard, bastard." He stood up and left before he could say something he'd regret.